Hi, Carol here from Owl's Nest Quilters, and we're cutting it up with Carol. We are going to start our project that we promised a couple weeks ago. And so this sort of is putting into practice all the things that we've been talking about, or some of the things that we've been talking about, so that you can really see how to use your scan and cut in a practical application in terms of quilting. So come along. So one of the things that I love about the scan and cut machine, if you can see on my screen, after I turn the machine on, it tells me that I have an update. So I don't have to research, like a lot of times with our embroidery machines, we don't necessarily know that there has been an update, but our scan and cut machine tells us. I'm not going to do that now because sometimes it can take a long time, so I'm just going to ignore it. So we are going to do 2 sessions for the completion of our Churn Dash garden table topper. And just as a reminder, you can get these instructions off of our website along with the supply list. The supply list is a little more detailed than the materials that are listed on the pattern. So be sure to download the supply list as well. And just as a reminder, if you're joining us without having seen the commercial enticing you to join us, please do not cut your fabrics. So all you want to do is gather up your fabrics, but beyond that, we're not cutting our fabrics by hand. We're cutting them on the scan and cut, and that is what these sessions are going to cover. So this first one is going to cover the applique designs that we're going to be doing, these little flowers. So you will need your pattern printed out, and on the back few pages, the back 2 pages, are the applique designs. So you'll want to get those, and I'm going to show you how to scan it in and edit them and get them all ready to be cut from our fabric. So this is all things that we've been talking about over these last few weeks and months, and now we're actually putting them into practice. So just for ease of beginning, let's take this last page, page 7, which is this pattern C. So with pattern C, I'm going to take my scanning mat, and I'm going to lift the cover sheet up and slip my pattern in there, right side up. It doesn't matter where on your mat you put it, as long as it's in between the black lines. And I'm going to load my machine, so I'm going to put it in between these 2 notches. I'm going to hold on to the mat with one finger while I touch the mat loading button, and then I'm going to let it go and do its thing. And for some reason it's not recognizing it. So periodically this will happen. This is all the fun of doing things electronically, but sometimes they cooperate and sometimes they don't. There it goes. Okay, so last time, or on one of the sessions, we talked about the different scans that we're going to do. So in this one, we're going to hit scan, and then we're going to hit the scan to cut data, because this is something that we need to manipulate and clean up and so on before we actually cut it. And it's just asking, or it's just telling you what's going to happen, and I'm going to say start. My scanner level is set to position 2, and I think I don't need to have it set on 2, so I'm going to start. It's recognizing it. Okay, and you probably can't see what it's done on the screen, but if you'll recall, we also talked about these 3 different types of scans, and this is just an outline, so that's all I want. So I'm going to press this outline scanning button, which is the one on the far left, and it's processing. Now I can actually see what my image is. I'm going to say OK. It's processing it again. I'm going to save it to my machine. And it says it's saved in my machine memory. And if you recall, that's all I can do on this screen. So once I have scanned it, processed it, saved it, processed it again, that's all I can do on this screen. If I try to do anything else, you'll become frustrated because then you'll be emailing me and say, I can't do anything because you're in the wrong screen. So once you've done that, you want to go home and delete all your patterns, yes. Then you want to go and retrieve your data and hit your machine and go to the last page. It's the last most item that is the most recently thing that you've saved. And I'm going to pick that up. So now you can see that there's all kinds of, I'm just going to say it, poo-poo all over your page. And we don't want all that poo-poo. So we need to get rid of that. That's what we need to edit out. So in your edit, you should see these 3 squares. If you hit that button, it will take you to another square buttons where you can either crop or organize. And I want to crop. So it's the leftmost one, and it will give you these cropping tools. So this is, you have to think of this in a way opposite to what we normally think of when we crop. Normally when we're cropping pictures, we're cropping around what we want. So like if you're, you took a picture of the family at Christmas time and you've got all this other stuff that's around the background, you want to crop that out, then you focus in on the part that you want and the rest of it goes away. This is the exact opposite. We don't want to focus in on what we want to focus in on what we don't want. So I'm going to move this lower button by pressing it and dragging. And I don't want all this stuff up here. And I'm going to hit OK. And you can see that it all turned red. I'm going to hit OK. And my trash. And OK to delete. Yep. I'm going to say OK. Now it's gone. So I need to get rid of all this stuff down here. So I'm going to hit those 3 squares again. Hit the cropping tool. Now I'm going to bring the right one down. And I don't really, a lot of people like to try to focus in on, exactly what it is you're cropping out. As long as I don't have my object in my window, I'm going to try to get as much space in there because I don't know what all is in there that's hidden. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK, and all that stuff lights up. Hit OK, hit the trash, and OK, and all that's done. So now all I have is my object, and I know that because my arrows are grayed out. So when we do this again, I'm going to show you another way of doing this to make sure that you don't have any little hidden things in there. But the screen is recognizing that I have one object, and that's what I want. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to say save. I want to save this. When you save this, the machine's going to ask you if you want to overwrite it or do a new one. Overwriting means that you don't want the original, and that there's no reason for me to want the original on just the one pattern piece. So I'm going to go ahead and overwrite it. If for some reason you wanted to save your original, then you want to create a new file. But there's no reason for me to save my one because then the original, because I'm going to have to go back through and erase all that stuff again, and I've done it once and that's all I want to do. Okay. Alright, so I have my object. Now, let's go ahead and cut. So there are several different applique products out there, the adhesive webbing. And I found that there are 2 that I particularly like. The first one is the Brother webbing because it is specifically formulated for the scan and cut machines, and it truly is a superior product. However, it is a slightly more expensive. So if it's a project that you really want to have preserved and you don't mind the expense, then I would definitely opt for the Brother product. The second most favorite is Heat and Bond because it is very similar to the Brother product, because it has, and I'll show you once we iron it on, that it has that slick kind of rubbery feel to it on the back. There are other products out there that do not work as well with the Scan and Cut. They're wonderful products for hand applique. The ones that work the best with the Scan and Cuts, in my opinion, and in my experience, are the Brother product and the Heat and Bond. So we are going to go ahead and cut out pattern C, and the pattern calls for a green fabric for that pattern piece. So I'm going to prepare my fabric by ironing it and starching it. So just give it a quick iron and a quick starch. Get all those wrinkles out. I like to use Best Press, but you may have another favorite starching product that you like to use. Get it nice and dry and a little bit on the stiff side. And I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to apply my Heat and Bond. Turn it back around. With a little bit of pressure and time, I'm going to apply the Heat and Bond to the back of my fabric. Heat and Bond, like the Brother product, really apply fairly quickly. It's a little bit longer of a process with some other products. My iron is not cooperating. You definitely want to make sure that you get a good bond. And I'm going to show you a little test trick that I use. Because having the adhesive webbing stick to the mat and not your fabric is not a fun thing. It makes a gooey mess. Okay, and it does get pretty hot. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut this off while it's cooling. I want to try to make my fabric the exact configuration. I'm going to cut my fabric fairly close to the Heat and Bond because I don't want to accidentally be cutting out pieces of my pattern on areas that don't have the Heat and Bond. Alright, so one of the things that I do to make sure that I'm going to be good to go on the Scan and Cut machine is I'm going to peel off part of the backing, and I'm actually going to try to grab on to my adhesive, and if I can pull it up, especially from a corner, because usually we don't get our corners as well as we do other things, then I'm going to want to reheat it. And I think that I have a pretty darn good bonding here. And I'm just going to check all 4 corners. Yep, I have a perfect bond there. So you can see, I think from the shininess, that this is really a rubbery, sort of plasticky, sticky, and it's not real ultra sticky to the hand, whereas other products, you know, once you peel off that backing, they're very sticky, and of course that stick then gloms onto your sewing machine needles. So this, I just like this product a lot, and the Brother is the same way. Okay, so this piece of fabric is ready to go. Let me just turn this off so I don't burn myself. So one of the other sessions that we had was about mats and their uses. And if this were live, I would be giving you a quiz. Should I apply this to my fabric mat or not? And I'm hoping that you all are saying, no, only bare naked fabric goes on my fabric mat. And I would say, yay! You are correct. I will be a very sad person if I were to put the applique backed fabric onto my fabric mat. It will make a mess and you will be buying a new fabric mat. So I'm going to use In my case, I'm just using a low tack because it's a fairly tacky low tack. So I'm going to put my fabric on there. Hopefully it's going to fit. Nope, I have a little bit of a... You want to be able to see your black markings on your mat, at least a majority of them. And set this up so I can get this on here nice and... Okay, so test one before I actually start cutting is to make sure that the backing has a good bond to my fabric, which I did by peeling the corner and kind of seeing if I could peel the backing off. The second test I'm going to do is I'm going to put my fabric down, then bearing quite a bit of pressure, I'm going to rub my finger along the fabric. And I don't know that the camera's picking this up, but you can see that there is pucker. So I do not have this on my mat well enough. So I'm going to pull that up, and I'm going to continue to try to scrape it down. So once I get to the point where I can, with a lot of pressure, move my fabric in any and all directions without it puckering and moving, then I know that my blade is not going to be doing the same. So if your blade catches onto your fabric and it starts moving and puckering, you're going to have a mess. So take the 2 seconds that it takes to do this finger test, and I think I'm going to be in pretty good shape. Okay, so those are the 2 tests that I do before actual cutting. So I'm going to load my machine. There we go. So in the my preferred blade, whenever I'm doing fabric, even though I'm not using the fabric mat, is to go ahead and use the fabric blade. You can cut with your standard blade, especially with the applique, but you can also cut fabric with the standard blade, but it's just not as crisp and nice as these fabric blades are. And in order to change, if anyone doesn't know, just quickly, there's a flat side to your holder. You want to put that into the machine, press down just a little bit to get it into its place. And if you have to struggle any more than that to click it into place, you don't have your holder in right. So nothing should be forced. Alright, so I am ready to cut this, but my pattern calls for 4 of these. So I'm going to go back to my edit and my object edit, and I'm going to go to the second one to the right on top, the middle one really, and I'm going to say that I want 4. So this is another way of thinking, having to think differently about things. In most cases you would think that your object that you already had in there is counted, but it's not. So, you know, in most cases you would have that one and you would say, oh, okay, I need to add 3 more, and you would press 3. Well, in the scan and cut world, you would have 3. So whatever the number is that you need is the number that needs to be on the screen. So I need 4, so 4 is on my machine. I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to say OK. So now I'm going to scan my fabric so that I can see where to place my objects. And now I can move my objects by just tapping and grabbing and moving them to where I want them to go. I can also, to even conserve more space, go back to Edit, Object Edit, and I can go to the 3rd button on the top, which is the Rotate. And I can take that one and I can rotate it so that it'll slip right in there. And I can do that one. I can rotate this one. So it'll slip right in there. And then I have a little bit more fabric to play with later on. But I'm actually going to bring that one down a little bit because it's too close to the edge. Alright, so some other little tips and tricks to think about. Do not get too close to the edge because then your blade will catch onto that and move it and it will create a mess. The other thing you can do if you want to is you can use the washi tape and tape the edges just to make sure that your blade isn't going to catch those edges. But if you stay, a quarter of an inch or more away from the edge, you should be fine. All right, I have my 4 objects. I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to say okay. And then you get the screen that says please select. And I'm going to select that, and I want to cut it. It'll take a second to process. Now this screen is important to spend a tiny bit of time on. It'll save yourself a lot of frustration. So this is the store machine, and it's used in a lot of different projects and by a number of people. So this actually is not set correctly, and that's good because this is an opportunity for me to teach you this. So it's going to take about a minute to cut it. The pressure is 3, which is automatic, and my speed is 4, which I can change my speed. This 4 is a nice, steady, fairly quick speed. But on this half cut, it says my half cut is on. Half cut is used for, is specifically for vinyl because you don't want to cut your transfer sheets. So I want a full cut. I don't want the half cut. So I'm going to go into my wrench and I'm going to scroll down a page and it says half cut on. I want to take that off and say okay. And now I see the half cut is off. So I'm good to go. If you are unsure about how your machine is performing, you can always do a test. But the beauty of these auto blade machines is that we basically don't have to test anymore because the machine calibrates the pressure and the thickness of your material. So it's pretty slick. So I'm going to go ahead and say start, and it's going to do its thing. So it's going to first start calibrating the thickness of the mat, and then it's going to move into the fabric and calibrate the thickness of it, and then it's going to start cutting. Okay, so if your fabric looks like it hasn't been cut, that's actually a good thing, because that means that my cut is nice and smooth. So I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to lift up my material, and voila! Look how beautiful those cuts are. They're nice and smooth and absolutely beautiful. So I can pull those off and save those for my project. So we'll put those aside. All right, so let's do our other sheet because there's a few more little things that I want to talk to you about with the one that has the multiple patterns on it. So why don't you grab page 6 along with your scanning mat. And we're going to take this one out and put this one in. One of the nice things about this project that I chose for you is that we don't have to worry about reversing anything. That we can do at another point for another project, but this one we don't have to do anything about because they're pretty symmetrical. So I'm done with this, and I can either go back and hit the back button and save this if I want to cut it out later. So I would just save. And this one asks again if it's overwrite or new. And this one, so my original just had the 1, which at this point isn't going to matter, mean anything to me. So I'm going to go ahead and overwrite this so that the one file that I have in my machine is the one that I would actually use with the 4 pieces on it. Okay, so I've gone ahead and saved this, and I'm just going to go home, and it says okay to delete all patterns. Yep, because I saved it. And now I want to start with my second sheet. So I'm going to load my mat. And I'm going to do the scan to cut data, and start. It's recognizing. There's a lot more to recognize on this page. All of these are just outlines, so I want to do the outline scan again. It's processing, and then you can see that I've got my 4 pattern pieces. If they weren't coming out dark enough, I can always adjust the darkness of it, but mine came out fine, and I'm going to say okay. It's going to ask me to save it in my machine. And then another pop quiz after it's been scanned and processed and saved. What do I need to do? I need to go home because I can't do anything else on here. So is it okay to delete? Yep, because it's saved. I'm going to pop this out. So now I'm going to retrieve my data from my machine, go all the way down to the last page, and pull up that last one that I scanned. Okay, so again, there's a lot of things on here that I don't want. And again, thinking of cropping, you're cropping what you don't want rather than cropping what you do want in other applications of the word cropping. But in this case, we do want to get rid of what we don't want. So I'm going to go OK, and to the edit, and then to these 3 red squares, and pick up the cropping window. So I'm going to pull this right one, or the top left one, all the way down, and put all of what I don't want, or as much as what I don't want, in the window, and hit OK. It all turns red. I hit OK. I hit trash, and OK, and it all goes bye-bye. So whenever you have more than one object on your screen, your arrows are going to light up. And this is always a good check to make sure that you don't have any random hidden things that you don't want cut, because whatever it registers on your mat, the machine will cut. So if you have something behind an object or whatever, you may all of a sudden get, a cut inside of your applique, which would not be fun to have. So I pick always the right hand button, and it's going to toggle to different parts of your page. So that's one way to make sure that you have just what you want on your page on your page. So I'm going to hit the red squares again so I can do things more efficiently. And I'm going to put all of what I don't want in the active box. Everything turns red. I hit OK. I hit trash. I hit OK. And all that goes away. So I'm still lit up because I do have 4 objects here. So I'm just going to hit the right arrow. It's going to toggle to each of those 4 items and then go back to the beginning. So all it's registering on my page is those 4 items. So I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to go ahead and overwrite the other one because I don't want all that poo-poo all over it. So now I have a nice, clean, working copy. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to take each of one of these and do an individual page for them. So I'm actually going to go ahead and, edit, that's what I want. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything except except for the object that I want, which is the big leaf. So I want that one to be the only one that I have right now. I need 8 of them. So if I go into Object Edit and I hit the number, even though I already have one on my screen, I need to tell the machine I want a total of 8. I can't just add 7 more and get 8. The machine doesn't work that way. Oops, so I need 8. And I have my 8 out there. So before I go through and mess with trying to get them all arranged and everything, I'm going to go ahead and fix my fabric the same way that I did before. And I may not be able to get all 8 on this, but I just want to at least demonstrate one more time how we do this. So I've already ironed this and sprayed this with a starch. Get this a little bit hotter. Cut this off. And I'm going to go ahead and apply the heat and get a nice good bond. So I want to cut my fabric close to the edge so that I'm not cutting out pieces in areas that don't have the webbing. Okay. And then my first test is to peel the corner, see if any of those corner pieces come off. And it looks like I've got a pretty good bond there. I'm trying to find an area where I didn't actually get a good bond so you could see what I'm talking about, but I'm sorry, I'm just too good. So, alright, that is good. I'm not using my fabric mat because you only use bare naked fabric on your fabric mat. So I'm going to put this on. Try to get a good stick. I'm going to use my finger test. So again, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but there is a ripple in my fabric. So if my finger can do it, the blade's going to do it. So I'm going to keep pushing this down. Looks like I'm getting a pretty good stick. Alright, I should be good. So I'm going to load my mat up. And I'm going to go back to where I can scan my mat. There will be times when you scan something, especially something that's this dark, and you won't be able to see your objects. So that's usually the default, where you will just get this big dark blob, and then the only way you can see your objects is once you highlight them and put the red active box around it, which is not very efficient. So if you go into your wrench, and there's an area that says background, whatever isn't active, press that one. So I'm going to press the one to the right of what the active one was and hit OK, and now it lightens it up so I can actually see what it is that where I'm placing my objects. And so I did not prepare a big enough piece, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the objects that I'm not going to be able to fit into my sheet of fabric here. Okay, so I should be able to get at least this many in there. Our hands are not as steady as the machine can be. So once you get things sort of placed where you want them, you have these crosshairs that you can press, and that gives you the move arrows. So this one is too high, it's too close to the edge of the fabric, so I'm just going to use the down button and bring that down. This one's too low, so I'm going to bring that one up. So if you are shaky and you're having a hard time placing it, you do have the move buttons. Okay, I think we're okay, and okay, and okay, and please select, and cut, and oops, I didn't want to test, sorry, and start. So this is the same process that you will go through for all the pattern pieces. There are, in the end there will be 5 different cutouts. You've got 2 layers of leaves, and then you've got 3 layers of the flower piece. I can find my picture here. So 1, 2, you've got 3 layers of the flower piece, and then 2 layers in the leaves. And I have already cut out all of mine, so I'll slip those out. And we can see those in a second. So finish cutting, release my mat. Someone's going to look at that and go, it didn't even cut. But it did. Pull that up, and there they are, perfectly cut. Nice and smooth edges. Beautiful. So then you'll cut out all of your pieces according to your pattern. And then I went ahead and started layering them, so you could kind of get an idea of what they're going to look like. And then these pieces are, there's one that's, and then these pieces are built kind of like that. And they would go there. So as I was working on my sample, I found that there are a couple of things that I want to alert you to in terms of the project. So what I would like you to do is to cut out the appliques, and those are fine, and then cut out, according to the dimensions that are given in the pattern, the pieces for the Churn Dash, which is this part. Okay. For the Churn Dash blocks. Stop there. Sew your Churn Dash blocks together, and then do your squaring up and your measuring, because I found that the sashing pieces were too short and were not the correct size, and then everything snowballed from there. So once you do your sashing pieces, which is the brown, and then sew your 4 blocks together and measure for your setting triangles. I added about an inch to each one of those. So the sashing, the 7.5 inch, 1 by 7.5 inch was fine for one side, and then I cut 8.5 by 1 for the other sides. And I did have to, they're oversized, so I did have to square those up. And then with the setting triangles, they're 10 and 7/8, which is almost 11, so I did 11.5. But measure so that you at least have a good 1/4 of an inch outside of your corners, so that you have a nice 1/4 of an inch when you're putting on your border pieces. So after you put your setting triangles in, then measure again to find out what your border pieces should measure. And so the only thing really that I would tell you is just to do them in this step fashion so that you come up with the quality of the project that you want. So this next part is going to be talking to you about cutting your fabrics. So you have to decide, as an individual, whether you want to take the time to do what we're going to be doing in order to cut fabric, or if you want to just do it the traditional way. My purpose of doing this is is twofold. One is because evidently there was somehow money exchanged at the kindergartner level to move me on, even though I had not passed cutting skills, and I am a horrible cutter. So when there is a project that I want to have more precise, I will take the time to do it with the scan and cut. The other is to show you that you can do it, so you can then decide for yourself whether you want to do it this way or if it's easier for you to just do it the traditional way. But this is a way that you can further make the scan and cut an accessory, a tool for your quilting and embroidery and so on. So we're going to talk about how to cut your fabric, which is why I did not want you to cut your fabric beforehand. The first one we're going to do is from the green print. So on page 2 is all of your fabric cutting instructions. So from my green print, I am supposed to do two 2 7/8 inch squares, cutting each in half diagonally for 4 triangles total. And then I need 4 1.5 by 2.5 rectangles, and we've already done our 4 of pattern C. So one of the areas that I am very imprecise is doing those half square triangles, because for some reason, one is always bigger than the other, even though I so carefully place my ruler and my rotary cutter. I always seem to get them not to be the same size. So when you're doing it on the scan and cut, they come out perfectly. So in order to cut fabric, bare naked fabric, you are going to want your fabric mat. And you're going to want your fabric blade. So we want the matching gold mat with the gold blade. And take the protective sheet off of this. You can tell that even though I've been using my mat quite extensively, it still has an enormous amount of stick. Just put this on. Okay, so in order to use your fabric with the fabric mat, you don't want to put any kind of webbing or anything on it, but you do want to starch, and you want to starch rather heavily. So I am going to use my best press and really saturate it. I know some of you might even have, gallons of this that you can, I know that some people have dunked their fabric into the best press. Those are oftentimes what award-winning quilters will do. But you want it to be a pretty stiff, almost cardstock like fabric. Very stiff and is it going to be something that's going to move? Because when we were doing our applique, the applique webbing acts as a stabilizer. With bare naked fabric, you don't have that stabilizer, so it becomes the starch. So I'm getting this nice and stiff. So you can see I'm pretty stiff. It's very paper-like. Okay, so once I have that nice and dry, and that is very, very stiff fabric. So what the pattern is calling for is 2 2 7/8 inch squares that you're going to cut into triangles. Well, I'm going to shoot right for cutting the triangles and bypassing the square issue. So when we want to do that, we want to go into pattern, and in the patterns we have all these shapes. So it's the shapes button, which is similar. It's a universal icon in the brother world with the square with the circle. It means shapes. You'll see that on our embroidery machines and in our scan and cut. Press that, and then just pages and pages and pages of shapes come up. So on that very first page, let's see, nope, it's going to be on page 3. We want a right triangle. And so that is going to be BA-A037. So it's going to be I think it was page 3, second row, second one in from the left is our right triangle. So I'm going to pull that one up, and I want to make it 2 7/8. So in decimal world, that is 2.87. And I want both of my sides to be that, so I want the aspect ratio to be on so that it will simultaneously decrease both sides at the same time. So it doesn't matter which one you hit, just hit the minus sign until you get to the 2.87. Oops, 2.8. Okay. Now, for some of you, you like to add that little bit of added extra fabric to account for the fold and the thread. So I would go up to like 2.90 if you want to do that. But I'm going to do these for my sake at the 2.87. So I'm going to go ahead and I can either set that, or I can go ahead and do my number here. And I want, so if I'm cutting 2 squares in half diagonally, then I want 4 triangles. So I'm going to add and make the 4. And again, the number that you want is the number that needs to show up on your screen. And now I can set, and my 4 triangles pop up. Again, I'm not going to do anything about moving them because I don't know where to move them to anyway. So I'm going to grab my fabric mat, and I'm going to put my bare naked fabric on my fabric mat. And I'm going to do the same kind of test that I did last time with the applique, and I'm going to bear down on it with a lot of strength and see if I can move the fabric, because if my finger can move it, the blade can move it. And I look like I have a pretty good bond there. The other reason for doing the starch is that it does cut down on some of the fraying that you will get. So we're going to go ahead and load it in the same way we've been doing it all along. And we're going to hit the scan button and let it scan so I know where to place my triangles. And I'm going to move my triangles. And I can flip these, just like I did with some of the, oops, wrong button. Just like I did with some of the applique pieces in order for them to fit. So I can always move them so that they're more like that, and it conserves space. Let's see. Because I also have to get out of this fabric my my 4 1.5 by 2.5 inch rectangles. Okay, so I have my triangles on there. I'm gonna hit OK. I'm gonna hit OK, and get back to this main screen. So I do have an option of adding more. So I'm going to hit the add button, and I'm going to hit the pattern and the shapes. And I'm going to pick up the rectangle, which is on the first page, the third row, the second in from the left, which is BA-A012. Because it's a rectangle, that means that the sides are not equal. You've got 2 sides that are one size and 2 sides that are another size. So it's not going to work to have the aspect ratio on. So the aspect ratio is this button over here where you have your vertical arrow and your horizontal arrow. And I'm just going to simply press that and it turns blue, which means in this case, in a lot of cases, the blue means that it's active. In this case, it means that it's inactive. So now I can do the height and you can see that the width isn't moving. I can do the width, and you can see that the height isn't moving. When this is on, both the height and the width are moving at the same time. Okay, so I want a 1.5 by 2.5 inch rectangle. So I'm going to just bear down on this minus sign and get this down to a 1.5. And again, if you want to add those few extra threads, basically, to have a slightly larger pattern piece, feel free to do that. I would probably go to 1.53. And I want this one to be 2.5. Oops, which means I would, if I want to add, I would do the 2.53. Okay, so I've got my 1.5 by 2.5 inch rectangle, and I'm going to set that. And I want to go to Edit and Object Edit, and the number is the first row, the middle button, and I want 4 of those. So I need to put 4 on there because that's the number that I want to have. And then I can move these pieces around. And I can conserve space. I'm not so interested in that right now because this is all I want out of this fabric. But if you're wanting to conserve fabric, you can put them closer together. It's just, for our sake, it's just hard to see. So I want to make sure that I have good separation. Alright, I'm going to take one last check here and see that I have my pieces that are at least 1/4 inch in from the sides. I'm going to click OK. And I think I'm good to go. I'm going to hit OK and select and cut and start. And the wonder of these machines, it's doing all the calibrating for me. Oops, got a little caught there. So if your machine does get horribly tangled up in your fabric, we do have this pause button. So if you just hit that, the machine will stop and pause until you figure out what the next step is. Because sometimes it might be to just abort and start over, or it could be like I did and just continue on. So I'm finished with the cutting. Lift one corner up, and voila, all the pieces except for that one that got caught is perfectly cut out. And this one has enough of a score line that I can take my scissors and finish that up. If I hadn't gotten caught, it would have been perfect. So it happens to me. Okay. So we've got our 4 triangles. Now I don't have to worry about trying to make sure that my 2 halves are the same size, because I know they are. Then I have my rectangles. And that's the process you go through for all of the strips that you need to cut out. The only thing that you're going to have to do traditionally, obviously, are the pieces that extend beyond the mat size. So when you have the border strips, unless you have a 24-inch mat, you won't be able to do the 2 1/4 by 24 inch strips, or the 2 1/4 by 20 1/2 inch strips. So those I cut traditionally. Those are for borders and sashings and bindings and things like that. So, but everything else cuts out just perfectly, and to the size that you need it. And I think it's just a nifty way, and it certainly has saved me a lot of hassle in terms of trying to cut more accurately than obviously I was trained to do or have the talent to do. So so that's what we want you to do now, just to give it a try, see how it works out for you. And if it's not something that you want to continue to do, and you want to go back to the traditional way of doing things, that's fine. But this is just letting you know that your machine does have the capability of you using it for your quilting. So some helpful hints for when you are constructing your table topper. When you are doing your Churn Dash blocks, you want to press your seams for the outside columns. So you're going to sew this piece to this piece to this piece for one column, this piece to this piece to this piece for a second column, and so on. So you'll have 3 columns that you're combining to make the final block. So the leftmost column should have your seams pressed toward, let me make sure, toward the middle. And then with these, you want the seams pressed toward the blues. And that way, when you put your columns together, you'll have those seam allowances going in opposite directions, and you can have that nice little nestle there. It also allows you to have, when you're sewing on your sashing and so on, that the seams that are going across the points these will be flat rather than flip the other way and creating a bump. So just some helpful hints there. And again, you'll want to have sew this piece to this piece and press the seam toward this middle piece, and with this one toward the middle piece. With this one, you want to press the seam toward the blue, and this seam toward the blue, and both of these pieces toward this middle piece, and you'll be in good shape. So that's one hint. The other is that when you're putting the 4 blocks together, I put them together in such a way that I didn't have to match the seams with the sashing, because you don't want to have your sashing going in an awkward way. You want to press the seam toward the sashing. And so in doing so, you're having your joined seam meeting up with a non-joined seam. And then you get this fun little pattern here in the center, which I think is kind of cool. So it solves 2 problems. When you're not having to nestle those seams together, you're doing a seam against a non-seam, and you get this fun little secondary pattern. So that's another hint. And then the last one is with the set-in triangles. Make sure that you definitely have your 1/4 inch where you're sewing, so you have a nice crisp point here. And then I did, just by eyeball, I did put the appliques on. I just laid a ruler down. I'm an 1.5 inches up from the sashing, and kind of centered this point of the leaves down the center of the sashing. But I just kind of eyeballed them and put them, but you can be more fussy if you want to be more fussy. But here's the finished product, at least the top, and then all I need to do is quilt it and bind it, and we have this fun little Churn Dash project that was done almost completely by the ScanNCut. Yay!
Owl's Nest Quilters, because you love to create. it.